My name is Arlene Carter, 54 years old. I built a successful career in real estate, but my greatest pride was always being a mother to my two children, at least until that night at my daughter Melanie's 21st birthday party. I'll never forget her words after her father presented her with a brand new luxury car. She looked at him adoringly and said, "Thank you, Dad, for the new car, but the only way you can make me happy is when you leave me alone." Everyone laughed. I smiled through my breaking heart. Then I did exactly what she asked. I'd love to know where you're watching from today. If you've ever had to make a difficult choice for your own well-being, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories of family heartbreak and healing. I never expected my life to unfold this way. Growing up in a small town in Indiana, I dreamed of a close-knit family where love flowed freely and unconditionally. I married Thomas when I was 22, swept away by his charisma and ambitious plans. He was handsome, confident, and promised me the world. For a while it seemed like we might actually have it all. Thomas started a construction business that showed early promise, and I worked as a receptionist at a local real estate office. We bought a modest starter home and planned to upgrade once his business took off. When I became pregnant with Melanie, 2 years into our marriage, we were ecstatic. Thomas painted the nursery himself and talked about the trust fund he'd create for our child's future. Melanie Grace Carter came into the world on a rainy April morning. The moment I held her with her tiny fingers and rosebud lips, I experienced a love so profound it physically hurt. Thomas seemed equally enchanted, carrying her around proudly and showing her off to everyone we knew. For the first few years, we were the family I had always imagined. Thomas was attentive, and Melanie was a sweet, affectionate child who would toddle after me, arms raised for constant hugs. "Mama up," she'd demand, and I'd scoop her into my arms, breathing in her baby shampoo scent, marveling at how perfectly she fit against my heart. The first fracture appeared when Melanie was 4. Thomas's business hit financial trouble. A development project went badly wrong, and suddenly we were facing significant debt. The stress changed him. He began staying out late, claiming he was meeting potential investors or clients, but coming home smelling of whiskey and perfume that wasn't mine. When I confronted him, Thomas turned it around, blaming me for not being supportive enough, for not understanding the pressures he faced. I was pregnant with Michael by then, and terrified of being left alone with 2 young children. So I swallowed my doubts and focused on holding our family together. After Michael was born, Thomas became increasingly absent. Days would pass without him coming home. When he did appear, he'd sweep in with expensive gifts for the children, toys they didn't need, clothes that were impractical. Then he'd disappear again, leaving me to handle everything from midnight fevers to school conferences to the mounting bills he neglected. I took on additional work, first selling real estate part-time, while the children were in school, then moving to full-time when Michael started kindergarten. I discovered I had a talent for it, understanding what people needed in a home, listening to their concerns. My commissions helped keep us afloat, while Thomas's business ventures continued to fail, one after another. Through all this, I made sure the children never felt our financial strain. I learned to stretch every dollar, cooking meals from scratch, shopping sales, repurposing clothes, finding free community activities. When Thomas would reappear with lavish gifts, I'd bite my tongue, not wanting to taint the children's joy with the reality that those gifts meant the electric bill might go unpaid. Melanie adored her father from early on. When she was little, she'd sit by the window for hours, on days he'd promised to visit her little face pressed against the glass. Too often I'd have to find creative explanations for why Daddy wasn't coming after all. "He loves you so much, sweetheart. But sometimes grown-ups have important work they have to do." As she grew older, the pattern became clear. Thomas would sweep in for birthdays or school events, showering Melanie with lavish gifts and grandiose promises, positioning himself as the fun parent while portraying me as the restrictive one. "Don't let your mother make you into a worrier like her," he'd say loudly enough for me to hear. Life's too short for all those rules. What Melanie never saw were the nights I spent at the kitchen table juggling bills, deciding which ones could wait another month. She didn't see me picking up extra listings when Thomas forgot to pay child support for months on end. She didn't know that I went without new clothes or doctor visits for myself to ensure she could participate in dance classes or school trips. Michael was different from the beginning, quieter, more observant. By age 7, he seemed to understand the dynamics at play. When Thomas would cancel plans last minute, Michael would pat my hand and say, "It's okay, Mum. We can have fun without him." His emotional intelligence broke my heart and healed it simultaneously. I tried never to speak ill of Thomas to the children, believing they deserved to form their own relationships with their father without my influence. Even when Thomas would openly criticize me in front of them, my cooking, my appearance, my boring career, I would simply change the subject or leave the room rather than engage in conflict. Perhaps that was a mistake. By protecting them from the truth, I inadvertently allowed Thomas to shape a narrative where he was the generous, fun-loving parent constrained by my supposed rigidity. It was a narrative Melanie embraced more completely with each passing year, and one that would eventually drive a wedge between us that I never imagined possible. Looking back, I can see how Thomas subtly undermined my relationship with Melanie from the start. The expensive doll I couldn't afford became evidence that Daddy loves you more. The reasonable bedtime I enforced was Mum being a killjoy. The homework I insisted she complete was unnecessary pressure. Through it all, I kept showing up. For every soccer game and dance recital, for every school conference and doctor's appointment, for the daily routines and midnight comforts that form the true foundation of a child's security. I believed that consistency would eventually speak for itself, that Melanie would recognize the difference between flashy appearances and steadfast presence. I was wrong. The seeds Thomas planted grew into a garden of resentment that would eventually bloom in ways I never could have anticipated. By the time Melanie entered her teenage years, the distance between us had grown from a crack to a chasm. She'd roll her eyes when I spoke, sigh dramatically at my suggestions, and save her smiles and enthusiasm for Thomas's infrequent appearances. Each dismissal stung, but I told myself it was normal teenage behavior. All mothers and daughters went through rough patches, didn't they? What wasn't normal was Thomas's encouragement of this division. When Melanie was 14, I overheard him on the phone with her. "Your mother just doesn't understand someone like you, Princess. You're special like me. We're cut from the same cloth. Some people just can't handle that kind of spirit." I confronted him afterward, and his response chilled me. "She needs someone who gets her," he said with a shrug. "You're too conventional, Arlene. Too focused on rules and responsibilities. Kids need to breathe." What Thomas called breathing, I called basic structure and values. I wanted Melanie to understand that actions had consequences, that commitments mattered, that consideration for others wasn't optional. Thomas painted these lessons as oppressive rather than foundational. When Melanie was 15, she wanted to attend a weekend party at a lake house 2 hours away. The parents would be absent, and there would be older boys and likely alcohol. I said no. Thomas, without consulting me, told her she could go, and even offered to drive her. "Mum's trying to keep you from having normal teenage experiences," he told her loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen. "Don't worry. I understand what it's like to be young." I stood my ground, and Melanie didn't go to the party. But the damage was done. In her eyes, I was the enemy of her freedom, her happiness, her very identity. Thomas was her champion, her ally against my oppression. That summer, I tried desperately to bridge the growing gap. I researched activities we might both enjoy, hoping to find common ground. I suggested a pottery class, remembering how she'd loved shaping clay in elementary school art. "That's for little kids," she scoffed. I found a weekend photography workshop, knowing she'd been taking pictures with the digital camera Thomas had given her. "I already know everything they'd teach there," she said dismissively, though she'd never had formal instruction. For every attempt I made to connect, Melanie had a ready rejection. Meanwhile, Thomas would breeze in after weeks of absence and suggest a shopping spree or dinner at an expensive restaurant, and Melanie would light up like Christmas morning. What hurt most was how Melanie began to rewrite our history. The years I'd spent reading bedtime stories, bandaging scraped knees, helping with school projects, and creating holiday traditions seemed to have vanished from her memory. According to her new narrative, I had always been controlling, always been distant, always been the obstacle to her happiness. "Dad gets me" became her mantra. "Dad understands what I want in life." What Thomas understood was how to use Melanie as a weapon against me. What he didn't provide was guidance, consistency, or the kind of love that shows up day after day, year after year. By the time Melanie entered her junior year of high school, she had fully embraced Thomas's materialistic values. The modest home I'd maintained through financial struggles was suddenly embarrassing compared to Thomas's temporarily upscale apartment, leased during a brief upturn in his finances. My practical car was humiliating next to the sports car Thomas occasionally drove leased and later repossessed. My emphasis on education and hard work was so middle class compared to Thomas's grandiose talk of connections and shortcuts to success. Michael, 3 years younger, watched this transformation with quiet confusion. "Why does Melanie act like Mum is the bad guy?" he asked me once. "You're the one who's always here." I didn't know how to answer without disparaging his father or sister, so I simply said, "Sometimes people can't see what's right in front of them, sweetheart. But that doesn't mean we stop loving them." When Melanie left for college, a school Thomas claimed to have pulled strings to get her into, though it was her grades and the recommendation letters I'd helped her request that actually secured her admission, I hoped the distance might give her perspective. Perhaps away from Thomas's direct influence, she might begin to see the truth of our family dynamic. Instead, college seemed to accelerate the pattern. Melanie called me only when she needed something: money for books, help navigating financial aid forms, advice when she got sick. Otherwise, her social media was filled with posts about weekend visits with the best dad ever and the restaurants, shows, and shopping trips he treated her to. What she didn't post about were the tuition payments I made when Thomas temporarily couldn't cover his promised share, or the care packages I sent monthly with homemade cookies, practical necessities, and handwritten notes of encouragement, or the emergency trip I made when she had a severe allergic reaction and ended up in the hospital while Thomas was unreachable on a golf trip with business associates. One particularly painful moment came during Melanie's sophomore year of college. I had driven 3 hours to help her move into a new apartment after her roommate situation imploded mid-semester. I spent the weekend helping her pack clean move boxes, set up the new place, and stock her kitchen. As I was preparing to leave, Thomas called. I could hear Melanie's voice brighten instantly. "Dad, guess what? I got a new apartment. It's so much better than the old one. No, I managed it myself. It was no big deal. Yeah, I'd love dinner next weekend when you're in town." I drove home in silence, tears occasionally blurring my vision. The erasure of my efforts wasn't new, but it never stopped hurting. Through it all, I maintained hope that eventually maturity would bring clarity, that someday Melanie would recognize the difference between performative parenting and consistent love, that the daughter who once clung to me and shared her every thought would someday return, even in some small measure. I never imagined that instead of a return to closeness, I was heading toward the most painful rejection of all. Melanie's 21st birthday fell on a Saturday in April. For weeks leading up to it, I planned how to make it special. Though money was still tight, I'd recently helped Michael with a down payment on a used car for his commute to community college. I'd saved enough to buy Melanie a delicate gold necklace with a pendant that matched one my grandmother had given me on my 21st birthday. I'd also found a first edition of her favorite childhood book at a specialty store. I wrapped these gifts carefully, writing a heartfelt card about my pride in the woman she was becoming. 2 days before the birthday, Thomas called me. "I've rented the rooftop lounge at the Pinnacle for Melanie's party," he announced without preamble. The Pinnacle was one of the most expensive hotels in the city, a venue I could never have afforded. "That's extravagant," I managed to say. "I thought we'd agreed on a family dinner at Giovanni's." Giovanni's was Melanie's favorite Italian restaurant where I'd made reservations months in advance. "That's so small time, Arlene," Thomas scoffed. "Our daughter only turns 21 once. She deserves something spectacular." "Does Melanie know about this change?" "Of course. She's thrilled. Her friends are all coming. You should have heard her excitement." The knowledge that they had planned this without including me, that my daughter hadn't even thought to mention it during our weekly phone call, was a familiar pain, but sharp nonetheless. "I see," I said quietly. "What time should I be there?" 7. "Oh, and Arlene. Try to dress appropriately. There will be some important people attending." I spent that evening alternating between my closet and my bank account, trying to figure out if I could afford something new that would meet Thomas's undefined standard of appropriate. In the end, I wore a simple black dress I'd had for several years, accessorized with a colorful scarf to freshen it up. The rooftop lounge was stunning with twinkling lights, floral arrangements, and a panoramic view of the city skyline. Melanie had invited at least 30 friends, plus Thomas's business associates and their partners. I recognized few of the faces, feeling increasingly like an outsider at my own daughter's celebration. Melanie looked beautiful, dressed in what I suspected was another gift from Thomas, a designer outfit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. When she saw me, she offered a quick, obligatory hug. "Mom, you made it," she said, as if my presence was uncertain rather than inevitable. "Of course, sweetheart. Happy birthday." I handed her my carefully wrapped gifts. "These are from me." "Thanks," she said, placing them on a table already piled with packages without opening them. "Dad's giving me my main gift later. He says it's going to blow my mind." Throughout the evening, Melanie circulated among her friends, occasionally checking in with Thomas, who held court at the bar. I made polite conversation with the few people I knew, feeling increasingly invisible. Michael had been unable to attend due to a mandatory training for his new job, so I didn't even have his friendly presence as a buffer. Around 9 o'clock, Thomas clinked a glass for attention. "Everyone. The moment you've all been waiting for. It's time for the birthday girl to receive her special gift." The crowd gathered around as Thomas handed Melanie a small box. Inside was a car key with a luxury brand logo. "No way," Melanie breathed, her eyes wide. "Dad, you didn't." "Only the best for my princess," Thomas announced, putting his arm around her shoulders. "It's parked downstairs, white with tan leather interior, just like you wanted." The room erupted in exclamations and congratulations. Someone suggested going down to see the car immediately. As the group began to move toward the elevator, Melanie turned to Thomas with shining eyes. "Thank you, Dad, for the new car," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Then she added with a laugh, "But the only way you can make me happy is when you leave me alone." The room rippled with laughter. Several of her friends nodded and cheered. "So true," one called out. "Parents, am I right?" added another. Thomas laughed loudest of all, clearly taking the comment as a joke. or even a compliment to his hands-off parenting style. "That's my girl," he said proudly, independent to the core. I stood frozen, a polite smile fixed on my face as the words echoed in my mind. Looking at Melanie's expression, not apologetic, not even aware of the impact of her words, I realized with sudden, devastating clarity that she meant it. All these years of trying to maintain our connection, of making excuses for her behavior, of believing that eventually she would see the truth, they had been exercises in self-delusion. The truth was simpler and more painful. My presence in my daughter's life was at best tolerated. At worst, it was actively unwanted. As the party moved downstairs to admire the new car, I slipped away. No one noticed my departure. In my car, sitting in the hotel parking garage, I finally allowed the tears to come. I wept not just for the hurt of that moment, but for years of rejection and dismissal. For a child I had given everything to who saw no value in any of it. When I could drive safely, I headed home, my mind racing with thoughts I'd never allowed myself to fully articulate before. What if I did exactly what Melanie wanted? What if I simply left her alone? The idea was both terrifying and strangely liberating. For 2 decades, my identity had been defined by motherhood, by the constant effort to maintain a relationship that Melanie seemed determined to devalue. What would happen if I stopped trying? Who might I be outside of this painful dynamic? By the time I reached my house, a decision was forming. Not in anger or revenge, but from a place of quiet self-preservation. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and others, is to take someone at their word. If leaving her alone would make Melanie happy, perhaps it was finally time to give her that gift. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad making lists and plans. By dawn, my course was set. I would do exactly what Melanie had said would make her happy. I would leave her alone. Completely. First, I wrote 2 letters. One for Melanie, brief but not cold, explaining that I was respecting her wishes as expressed at her birthday party. I told her I would always love her, but I understood now that my presence in her life was not what she wanted. I included information about the automatic payments I'd set up to cover the remainder of her college expenses, my final act as the mother who had always ensured her needs were met, even when unappreciated. The second letter was for Michael, longer and more detailed. I explained my decision, assured him it wasn't his fault, and promised we would stay connected. I gave him my new contact information with the strict understanding that he couldn't share it with Melanie or Thomas. I hated putting him in this position, but at 17, nearly 18, he was mature enough to understand the complexities of the situation. Next, I called Catherine, my younger sister, who lived in Oregon. We'd always been close, though distance meant we saw each other rarely. I explained everything: the years of Thomas's manipulation, Melanie's increasing rejection, and finally the birthday party incident. "Are you sure about this, Arlene?" Catherine asked, concern evident in her voice. "It seems so final." "It's not meant to be permanent," I explained. "But I need to step back completely. No halfway measures. Melanie needs to experience what it truly means when I leave her alone, not just have me at a slightly greater distance, but still available whenever convenient." Catherine reluctantly agreed to serve as my emergency contact and to keep me updated on any significant developments with Melanie or Michael. She also offered her guest room if I needed somewhere to stay temporarily, but I had already decided on a different destination. That morning, I visited my bank and emptied my modest savings account. I paid a visit to my real estate broker, explaining that a family emergency required me to take an extended leave of absence. She was understanding. I'd been a reliable agent for years, and assured me my position would be available when I returned. I spent the day packing essentials into my car. Clothes, important documents, a few cherished photographs and mementos. I left behind furniture, kitchen items, most of my books, all the accumulation of a settled life. It was surprising how little I truly needed to take with me. The hardest part was saying goodbye to Michael. He came over that evening, confused by my cryptic phone call, asking to see him urgently. "I don't understand, Mum," he said, his young face creased with worry after I explained my plan. "You're just leaving because of what Melanie said. Not just because of that," I told him gently. That was simply the moment when everything became clear. This isn't healthy for any of us, especially not for me. I've spent 21 years being rejected by your sister and undermined by your father. I need to step away and rediscover who I am outside of that dynamic. But where will you go? What will you do? I have some savings. I have my real estate license, which is valid in several states. I'll be fine. I hugged him tightly. And we'll stay in touch. This isn't about leaving you. Michael was upset, but eventually understood. Before he left, he helped me load the last few boxes into my car. "I love you, Mum," he said fiercely as we embraced one final time. "Don't let them make you think you weren't an amazing mother." His words carried me through the night as I drove away from the only community I'd known as an adult. I headed south toward a small coastal town in North Carolina that I'd visited once on a vacation and had always thought was charming. It was far enough away to ensure I wouldn't accidentally encounter anyone from my past, but not so remote that finding work would be impossible. 3 days later, I arrived in Seabrook, exhausted but oddly hopeful, using cash. I rented a small furnished apartment 2 blocks from the beach. The landlady, Mrs. Pearson, was a widow in her 70s, who seemed grateful for a tenant who was mature and responsible, as she put it. I gave her a slightly modified version of my story, recently divorced looking for a fresh start, which wasn't far from the truth. Within a week, I'd secured a position with a local real estate agency, specializing in vacation properties and retirement homes. My experience was valuable to them, and the owner was willing to be flexible while I obtained my North Carolina license. I changed my cell phone number, created a new email address, and began the process of building a life that wasn't defined by being Melanie's mother or Thomas's ex-wife. Catherine called regularly with updates. Melanie hadn't noticed my absence for nearly 2 weeks. She was too busy with her new car and the spring semester finals. When she finally tried to reach me about summer storage for her dorm items and couldn't get through, her reaction was anger rather than concern. "She accused you of playing games," Catherine reported. "Thomas told her not to worry, that you were probably just trying to get attention and would be back when you realized no one was chasing after you." That hurt, but it also confirmed I'd made the right decision. For too long, I'd been a character in Thomas's narrative, rather than the author of my own story. It was time to change that. The first holidays alone were difficult. On Thanksgiving, I volunteered at a community dinner, rather than sitting home with memories. At Christmas, I accepted an invitation from co-workers for an orphans' Christmas gathering of people without local family. There were moments of intense loneliness nights when I questioned my decision, mornings when I woke reaching for the phone to call Melanie, before remembering our reality. But there were also new experiences. Walking on the beach at sunrise, taking a painting class at the community center, reading books that had been on my someday list for years, rediscovering parts of myself that had been subsumed by the constant effort of trying to maintain a relationship with someone who didn't value it. 6 months into my new life, Catherine called with news that sent my heart racing. "Thomas has stopped paying Melanie's rent and expenses," she said. "Apparently his latest business venture collapsed and he's claiming bankruptcy again." "But the automatic payments I set up for her tuition?" I asked, immediately concerned despite everything. "Those are still going through. But she's struggling with day-to-day expenses. She's been trying to reach you." I closed my eyes, fighting the instinct to immediately rush to my daughter's rescue. What has Michael told her? Only that you're safe but needed space. He's kept his promise not to reveal details. That night, I wrote in the journal I'd started since moving to Seabrook. Today was the first test, I wrote. The first time I've had to actively choose not to rescue Melanie from consequences. It feels terrible and necessary. It was the pattern of our relationship in miniature. Thomas made grand promises he couldn't keep, then disappeared when reality caught up. I stepped in to handle the practical fallout, enabling both their behaviors. By removing myself from this dynamic, I was forcing a reckoning that was long overdue. As the months passed, my new life took shape. I made friends cautiously at first, then with increasing openness. Eleanor, a divorced woman in her 60s who'd moved to Seabrook after her husband left her for his secretary, became my closest friend. We shared a love of mystery novels and beach walks, and she understood the complexity of family estrangement without judgment. I joined a community garden, discovering an unexpected joy in growing vegetables and flowers. I found a therapist who specialized in family trauma and began the hard work of unpacking decades of emotional manipulation and self-neglect. I even went on a few casual dates, though I wasn't ready for anything serious. Catherine kept me updated on developments back home. Thomas had indeed declared bankruptcy again, leaving numerous debts. Melanie had been forced to get a part-time job to cover expenses, something I had suggested years ago as an important life skill, only to be overruled by Thomas, who claimed it would distract from her studies. Michael had graduated high school and was thriving at community college, working part-time at a technology repair shop. And Melanie. According to Catherine, she had gone through several phases. Initial anger at my abandonment, then embarrassed dismissal. I'm better off without her drama. Then occasional moments of quiet reflection that Catherine observed when Melanie didn't know she was watching. In October, 7 months after I'd left, Michael visited me in Seabrook. We spent a wonderful weekend exploring the town, walking the beaches, and really talking in a way that had sometimes been difficult in the shadow of the Thomas-Melanie dynamic. She asks about you sometimes, he said as we watched the sunset on my small balcony. Not directly, but she'll say things like, I wonder if Mum would know how to fix this, or remember when Mum used to make that chicken dish. I nodded, feeling the familiar ache. That's natural. We shared a life for 21 years. Dad's completely unreliable now, Michael continued. He promised to help her with rent last month, then ghosted her. She had to borrow money from friends. I managed not to say, I told you so, which wouldn't have helped anything. Instead, I asked, how are you handling all this being in the middle? Michael shrugged. It's not ideal, but I'm learning a lot about boundaries. He smiled slightly, kind of like you did. When he left to return home, I felt both sad and proud. Sad for the family fractures that had brought us to this point, proud of the thoughtful young man Michael was becoming despite it all. The holidays approached again, and with them came an unexpected development. Catherine called one evening in early December with news that left me speechless. Arlene, she said without preamble, Melanie found your gift, the one from her birthday. I sat down heavily. What? She was clearing out some storage boxes and found the unopened presents, the necklace and the book. And your card. She called me crying. My heart hammered in my chest. What did she say? She asked if I knew how to reach you. I didn't tell her anything specific, just that you were safe and building a new life. She said, Catherine paused. She said she understands now why you left. 18 months after driving away from my old life, I had established a comfortable routine in Seabrook. My work at Coastal Dreams Realty had evolved from entry-level to managing vacation properties for several high-end clients. I'd made friends, joined community groups, and even adopted a rescue cat named Captain, who greeted me with purring enthusiasm each evening. My small apartment now felt like home, decorated with beach finds and local art. The nightmares that had plagued me initially, dreams where Melanie cried for me and I couldn't reach her, had largely subsided. I still thought of my children daily, but the sharp pain had dulled to a more manageable ache. Michael visited every few months, carefully maintaining the bridge between my old life and new. He reported that Melanie had graduated college and found a marketing job with a mid-sized company. Thomas flitted in and out of her life, appearing when things were going well, disappearing during challenges. The pattern continued, though perhaps Melanie was beginning to recognize it for what it was. It was a Tuesday in October, unusually warm for autumn. I was at the office reviewing listings for a client interested in beach property when my colleague Dana poked her head into my cubicle. "There's someone asking for you at reception," she said. "A young woman." Didn't give her name. My heart stuttered. It couldn't be. I'd been so careful. I walked to the reception area, slowly trying to prepare myself for any possibility. And there she was, Melanie, looking both familiar and somehow different. Thinner, with shadows under her eyes I didn't remember. More subdued than the confident young woman who had dismissed me so casually at her birthday party. For a moment we just stared at each other. Then she spoke, her voice small. "Mum." I nodded, unable to form words around the lump in my throat. "Can we talk? Please?" I glanced at my watch, then at Dana, who was trying to pretend she wasn't watching this drama unfold. "I can take an early lunch," I said finally. "There's a cafe around the corner." We walked in silence, the October sunshine incongruously bright for the heaviness between us. The cafe was quiet, most of the lunch crowd not yet arrived. We found a table in the corner, ordered coffee, and then faced each other. "How did you find me?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "Michael," she admitted. "He wouldn't tell me at first. Said it wasn't his secret to share. But I wore him down." She looked down at her coffee. "I told him I needed to make things right." I nodded, unsurprised. Michael had been caught in an impossible position. "Why now, Melanie?" "It's been 18 months. She fiddled with her napkin, tearing small pieces from the edge. "It took me a while to understand what happened. Why you left. At first I was just angry. Thought you were being dramatic, trying to teach me some kind of lesson." "It wasn't about punishment," I said quietly. "I know that now." She looked up and I saw tears in her eyes. "Dad. After you left, he was great for a while. Stepped up, helped with expenses, was really present. Then his business had problems and he just vanished. Stopped returning calls, cancelled plans, made promises he never kept." The familiar pattern playing out exactly as I'd expected. "I'm sorry that happened," I said, and meant it. "Don't be." It opened my eyes. Melanie took a shaky breath. For the first time, I had to deal with real adult problems without a safety net. No dad swooping in with quick fixes. No mum quietly handling all the practical details. And I realized I never appreciated everything you did. All those years. I sipped my coffee, giving her space to continue. "After Dad disappeared this last time, I found the birthday presents you gave me. The ones I never opened." Her voice cracked. "The necklace that matched Grandma's. The book I loved as a kid. Your card saying how proud you were of me. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd made you proud. Or even tried to." Tears slipped down her cheeks now. "All those years you were the one who was actually there. Making lunches, helping with homework, working extra jobs to pay for dance classes and school trips. And I treated you like you were nothing. My own eyes filled with tears. We both made mistakes, Melanie. No, she said firmly, surprising me with her conviction. You made sacrifices. I made choices. Selfish, hurtful choices. I believed Dad's version of you because it was easier, because it let me blame you for saying no instead of blaming him for never being there. Her self-awareness caught me off guard. This wasn't the entitled girl who had so casually dismissed me at her birthday party. This was a young woman who had done some painful growing up. How are things now? I asked, genuinely wanting to know. Your job. Your life. The job's okay. Entry-level marketing work. The pay barely covers my apartment, but it's a start. She attempted a smile. I had to learn to budget, to cook instead of ordering takeout. All those practical things you tried to teach me that I thought were so boring. We talked for nearly 2 hours, the lunch crowd coming and going around us. Melanie told me about her struggles after college, about finally recognizing Thomas's pattern of appearing when it benefited him and vanishing when things got difficult. About discovering that many of the friends who had laughed at her birthday party joke weren't there when she needed real support. I said terrible things about you, she admitted. To friends on social media. I'm so ashamed now. We can't change the past, I said. Only move forward. As our conversation wound down, the inevitable question hung between us. So what happens now? Melanie finally asked. I don't expect you to just come back. I know I damaged our relationship maybe beyond repair, but I had to at least tell you I understand now. And I'm sorry. I looked at my daughter, this complex young woman who had caused me so much pain and who I still loved with a fierceness that surprised me, and considered my answer carefully. I've built a life here, Melanie. A good one. I can't and won't abandon that to return to our old dynamic. I saw her face fall slightly and added, but that doesn't mean we can't build something new, something healthier for both of us. I'd like that, she whispered. It would require real changes, I continued. Clear boundaries, mutual respect, no more allowing your father to triangulate and manipulate us against each other. She nodded earnestly. I understand. I've been learning about healthy relationships in therapy, about patterns and boundaries and all of it. You're in therapy. This was perhaps the most surprising revelation of the day. Since January, after Dad's latest disappearing act, it's been eye-opening. She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. Turns out I have some daddy issues to work through. Despite everything, I smiled. Don't we all? As we prepared to leave the cafe, Melanie hesitated, then asked, Could I see where you live, just to know you're okay? I considered this testing my feelings. Yes, I decided. But just a brief visit. I have to get back to work, and you have a long drive ahead of you. We walked the 2 blocks to my apartment building. Mrs. Pearson was sweeping the front steps and gave Melanie a curious once-over as I introduced them. Inside my apartment, Captain greeted us with his typical vocal demands for attention. You have a cat, Melanie observed, surprised. You always said you weren't a cat person. I've discovered many things about myself in the past 18 months, I replied. Some surprising. Melanie looked around my small but comfortable space, taking in the seashell collection on the windowsill, the painting from my art class hanging on the wall, the books stacked beside my reading chair. Evidence of a life continued, evolved in her absence. It's nice, she said finally. You seem happy. I am. I told her, realizing as I said it that it was true. Not in the way I expected to be at this point in my life, but yes, I'm happy. When it was time for her to leave, we stood awkwardly at the door. Can I... Would it be okay if I called you sometimes? She asked hesitantly. I nodded, feeling both caution and hope. We can try that. Start small and see where it leads. She stepped forward and hugged me briefly, the first genuine embrace she'd initiated in years. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me, even after everything. As I watched her walk to her car, not the luxury vehicle Thomas had given her, but a practical, used sedan, I felt a complex mix of emotions lingering: hurt, cautious optimism, pride in her growth, and a deep, unchangeable love that had weathered the worst storm imaginable. This wasn't an ending or even a neat resolution. It was simply another step in a journey that had proven far more complicated than I ever could have imagined when I first held my newborn daughter in my arms all those years ago. 2 years after Melanie's birthday party, that changed everything, my life had found a new equilibrium. I remained in Seabrook now in a slightly larger apartment, with a small garden patio, where Captain enjoyed supervised outdoor time. My work at Coastal Dreams Realty had led to a partnership opportunity, giving me financial security I'd never experienced during my marriage. The relationship with my children evolved gradually, with careful steps forward and occasional stumbles. Michael visited regularly, bringing warmth and his gentle humor. He'd transferred to a 4-year university and was thriving in computer science, reminding me that despite all the family dysfunction, something had gone right in my parenting. Melanie and I rebuilt our connection with deliberate intention. After her surprise visit, we began with occasional phone calls that were sometimes awkward, sometimes tearful, sometimes surprisingly comfortable. There were difficult conversations about the past, her hurtful behaviors, my enabling patterns, Thomas's manipulations. Through it all, I maintained the boundaries I'd established, not rushing back into an all-forgiving maternal role, but allowing a new adult relationship to develop. 6 months after her first visit, Melanie called with news. I broke up with Dad, she said without preamble. You what? I asked, confused by her phrasing. That's how my therapist helped me see it. It wasn't a father-daughter relationship. It was like a toxic romance. He love-bombed me with gifts and attention, then disappeared when I needed consistency. I made excuses for him, blamed myself when he let me down. Classic codependency. The clarity in her analysis surprised me. That's quite an insight. I told him I needed a real father, not a fair-weather friend who shows up only when it's convenient. He got angry, said I was ungrateful, that I'd been turned against him. She paused. He tried to blame you, said you'd poisoned me against him. And what did you say? I asked carefully. I told him that you never said a bad word about him, even when he deserved it. That you let me form my own opinion, which was the problem. I was too young to see through his manipulation. Her voice strengthened. I said I was setting boundaries. He could be a consistent, respectful presence in my life, or he could be nothing. His choice. Pride surged through me, not because she'd confronted Thomas, but because she was advocating for herself, recognizing unhealthy patterns and choosing something better. That must have been difficult, I said. It was. He's been texting since then, alternating between guilt trips and love bombing. But I'm holding firm. She sounded both sad and resolute. My therapist says it's called growing a backbone. Thomas himself reached out to me around this time, his first direct communication since I'd left. His email was predictably self-serving, accusing me of turning the children against him, demanding I fix what I'd broken. I didn't respond. Some dynamics couldn't be changed, only recognized and avoided. My personal life blossomed in unexpected ways. Eleanor, my first friend in Seabrook, introduced me to her brother-in-law James, a widower who taught history at the local community college. Our friendship evolved slowly into something deeper: companionable dinners, long beach walks, shared books and conversations. At 56, I found myself experiencing a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine interest, so different from the drama and disappointment of my marriage. "You deserve this," Eleanor told me once, watching James and me laughing over dinner at her house. "Both of you, good people finding each other after hard journeys." I hadn't expected romance in this chapter of my life, but I welcomed it with cautious joy. James understood family complexity. His adult sons had struggled after their mother's death, one turning to addiction before finding recovery. He never rushed me, respecting the boundaries I'd learned to establish, appreciating the woman I'd become through challenge rather than expecting me to be someone else. When I finally told Melanie about James during one of our calls, her reaction surprised me. "That's wonderful, Mum," she said with genuine warmth. "Does he treat you well?" "Very," I assured her. "He's kind and thoughtful. We enjoy each other's company." "Good," she said firmly. "You deserve someone who sees your value." The holidays approached, bringing the question of family gatherings. After careful consideration, I invited both Michael and Melanie to visit Seabrook for Thanksgiving. It would be our first holiday together since I'd left a significant step in our evolving relationships. Michael accepted immediately. Melanie hesitated. "Would it be okay if I brought someone?" she asked. "Just a friend. His family situation is complicated, and he doesn't have anywhere to go." The friend turned out to be Damon, a co-worker from her marketing firm. Quiet and thoughtful, he seemed to balance Melanie's more dramatic tendencies with his steady presence. Watching them interact, I saw none of the unhealthy dynamics that had characterized her previous relationships. He listened when she spoke. She considered his opinions. They functioned as equals. Our Thanksgiving was small but meaningful. James joined us, bringing homemade rolls and his gentle humor. Eleanor and her daughter came for dessert. We ate too much, played board games, and walked on the beach despite the November chill. There were moments of awkwardness, old tensions briefly surfacing. But overall, it felt like the beginning of something new, rather than an attempt to recreate the past. That evening, after everyone else had gone to their respective accommodations, Melanie lingered in my kitchen, helping with the last of the dishes. "Thank you," she said, suddenly handing me a dried plate, "for not giving up on me completely. You would have been justified." "I never gave up on you," I corrected gently. "I gave up on a dynamic that was hurting both of us. There's a difference." She nodded thoughtfully. "I used to think love meant having no boundaries, that if you really loved someone, you'd tolerate anything from them." "That's what Thomas modeled," I said. "That love was either all-consuming or completely absent. No healthy middle ground." "I'm learning different," she said, looking at me directly. "From you, from therapy, from Damon even. That real love has structure, expectations, mutual respect." I smiled, feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with being proved right, and everything to do with watching my daughter grow into wisdom. That's a valuable lesson, one that took me far too long to learn. "Better late than never, right?" she offered with a small smile. "For both of us." I agreed. In the 2 years since I'd driven away from my old life, much had changed. I'd discovered strength I never knew I possessed. I'd built a life centered on my own needs and values rather than constantly accommodating others. I'd learned that sometimes the most loving choice is to step back and allow natural consequences to unfold. And perhaps most surprisingly, I'd found that relationships, even deeply damaged ones, can transform when all parties commit to growth and truth. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been nights of doubt, days of loneliness, moments when I questioned everything. But standing in my kitchen with my daughter, witnessing the woman she was becoming, I knew that my difficult choice had been the right one, not just for me, but ultimately for her as well. Have you ever had to make the painful decision to step back from a relationship for your own well-being, or experienced reconciliation after a period of estrangement? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. If this journey of boundaries, self-discovery, and healing resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more authentic stories of family relationships. And if you know someone struggling with similar challenges, consider sharing this video as a reminder that sometimes the hardest choices lead to unexpected healing. Thank you for joining me today on this journey through one of life's most difficult lessons, that true love sometimes means loving from a distance until healthy connection becomes possible.